extinction of animal life.
For years, the killer was a mystery. But now, researchers think it could be something we're all familiar with today.
Smell that.
Oh, yeah, it smells like rotten eggs.
Rotten eggs.
Yeah.
This is
And the trigger could be all around us.
this terrible gas chamber atmosphere. It's not so much stuff from space that gets you, it's your own planet.
Talk about extinction. This scientist has brought back to life one of the most lethal viruses in history, the 1918 flu.
This killed probably at least 50 million people worldwide.
What was he thinking?
We felt like it was important to actually reconstruct this virus.
What he's learned might unlock the secrets of how the avian flu, the one we're worried about now, could spread, infect, and possibly kill millions.
Maybe we can figure out how to stop it.
And you'll meet this guy.
Hello, Leo. Can you hear me?
He was designed by an engineer who's building sociable robots.
You're such a cute little robot.
Robots that one day may even become our friends, with feelings and emotions.
Ooh.
Wait a minute, an emotional robot?
I do think in time, people will have sort of relationships where they might feel that it is a friendship, that it's going to be of a robot, humankind.
Can you find Elmo?
All that and more on this episode of Nova Science Now. Hello, I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, your host for Nova Science Now. We all know that Earth is brimming with life. All kinds of life, as it has been for most of the past 600 million years. But every now and then, something happens. Earth becomes a very unfriendly place, and most life can't survive. It's called mass extinction. We know it's happened over and over again in the deep past, but we don't always know why. In a remote Nevada desert, a team of investigators is trying to solve an old murder mystery.
So yeah, this looks good.
And I mean old. The victims were knocked off about 250 million years ago in an ancient mass extinction.
Based on the fossil record, this is probably the most profound extinction of animal life.
There's no other time in the last 600 million years that you wipe out 95% of all the species in the ocean.
Geologist Sam Bowering and paleontologist Doug Irwin think this hillside might be a scene of the crime. They're looking for clues to find out what caused the mysterious end of the geologic period, known as the Permian.
The Permian world and the extinction that ended the Permian world really reset the nature of life on this planet. This is a straight nautiloid.
Paleontologist Peter Ward has spent years collecting fossils from the strange time of the Permian.
Permian would have looked very different to us. Let's say we go back there. We look around, no flowers, no flowering plants. There's not even dinosaurs. This is before dinosaurs. There probably wasn't a single animal on the planet with fur.
True mammals hadn't evolved yet, but their ancestors were there. Animals like this Lemursaurus.
This is a mammal-like reptile, probably small dog size. This animal is a carnivore. It really has a dog-like appearance. We can see this great big piercing tooth.
Clearly making him a predator.
Yeah, but this entire group dies out in the extinction itself.
They were creatures right out of a science fiction movie, like plant-eating listosaurs, and ruining their dinner, monstrous gorgons. The extinction ravaged the oceans, once filled with exotic animals. But then, about 250 million years ago, almost everything on sea and land died. So, who's the culprit? What could kill off so much life? Could it be climate change? global warming? Or would you need something from out of this world? There have been at least 5 major extinctions in the past 600 million years. Most of us have heard of one at the close of the Cretaceous, ending the reign of the dinosaurs. That happened about 65 million years ago, when an asteroid the size of Mount Everest slammed into our planet, leaving a giant crater near what is now Mexico. So we know the dinosaurs were knocked off by a giant rock that fell from the sky. And we also know that these rocks hit Earth from time to time. So when we try to figure out what caused all the mass extinctions of the past, shouldn't it just make sense that they'd also be caused by comets and asteroids?
I went into this controversy fully expecting to find all the evidence for impact. And at the end of the Cretaceous, we see this. We see lots of comet material or asteroid material.
Not to mention the crater, of course.
Not to mention the crater, and least of all the crater.
So you've got the smoking gun, and the bullets, and of course the dead bodies, I guess.
Well, the only thing we have at the end of the Permian are the dead bodies.
So if asteroids and extinction don't necessarily go hand in hand, what does Earth do with all those asteroids that come our way?
The Earth is hit by asteroids all the time, big ones. Doesn't cause mass extinction. Why not look for something a little bit different?
But where can we find that something?
Here's the boundary right here.
This Nevada hillside might be one of a few existing Permian crime scenes in North America. But the team must date the rocks to see if they're the same age as the extinction.
Timing is everything. You have to have rocks that can be dated precisely.
Back at the lab, the team breaks down the rock. Rare elements reveal when the rock formed. The results? About 250 million years old. So this is a crime scene. But where's the killer? What kind of a disaster other than an asteroid could destroy so much life? One of the prime suspects is an ancient group of volcanoes, now dormant, whose remains lie in eastern Russia. Known as the Siberian Traps, these were no ordinary volcanoes.
Most people, when they think of volcanoes, think of Mount St. Helens or Mount Pinatubo. That's nothing like these volcanic episodes.
The Siberian Traps oozed lava for up to 1 million years, smothering an area about the size of the continental United States. In some places, over 1 mile deep.
That is a lot of lava.
Sure is, but still, the lava was in Siberia, not in the rest of the world, not in the whole ocean. So why would almost everything on Earth die? Marine geochemist Lee Kump thinks he's found the answer. The key is in how big volcanoes could change the environment, including the chemistry of the Permian Ocean. To test his idea, he designed a computer model to simulate the Permian world.
So the model starts out like a weather forecasting model or a climate model. It has the winds, there's the ocean currents that are driven by those winds, there are temperature variations, but the model also has life in it.
All plants and animals and bacteria are in fact chemical factories, taking in nutrients and spewing out waste products. With life's chemistry factored in, Lee's model reveals a disturbing chain of events. It all starts with the Siberian Traps, but the trigger is not the incessant flow of lava, which would burn and bury any life nearby. No, the real culprits are the gases that the volcanoes spew into the atmosphere, including one we've all heard of lately, carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide that's spewing out of these volcanoes is a greenhouse gas.
Greenhouse gases trap the sun's heat in our atmosphere, forcing the whole Earth to warm up. Of course, that's global warming. But it doesn't end there. Global warming would have heated the Permian Ocean, and when it did, ocean chemistry would have changed dramatically.
There's a difference between warm and cold water. Cold water can hold more gas than can warm water. And so this is fundamentally why we drink champagne and beer and soda cold rather than warm.
What's true for champagne, beer, or soda is also true for the ocean and one of its most important gases, oxygen.
Cold water can hold a lot of oxygen. Warm water can't hold much oxygen.
And if water loses its oxygen, things can go from bad to worse. Lee and his research team have seen this firsthand at Green Lakes in central New York State.
Hey Rob, you ready?
This lake is narrow and deep, and there's little wind. As a result, the deeper waters have lost their oxygen.
It's safe to swim in this lake as long as you stay above 70 feet.
Below that, the oxygen-free water has attracted a deadly form of bacteria.
There are bacteria that can thrive under those conditions, and those bacteria produce hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is a very toxic substance, and so the deep part of this lake is highly poisonous.
Oh. It's also bright pink.
There you go.
Hey, thanks. Look at that.
When we bring these samples to the surface, of course, they're rich in hydrogen sulfide. They stink like rotten eggs, and they're poisonous.
Oh, that stinks. Yuck.
The bright pink color comes from another microbe, purple sulfur bacteria, that thrive in hydrogen sulfide.
Look at that.
Bacteria like these can leave chemical traces in ancient rocks. In fact, such traces have been found in some rocks dating to the Permian extinction. For Lee, it's a sign that the Permian Ocean might have resembled this poisonous lake.
This lake is a microcosm of what we think the ocean was like in the late Permian.
According to Lee's computer model, over time, the oceans would have become so full of hydrogen sulfide that in some spots, the deadly gas would have bubbled right out into the atmosphere, killing millions of creatures, not only in the sea, but also on land. The deadly microbes under suspicion aren't rare. They thrive wherever there's water and no oxygen, as Peter Ward showed me on an ordinary beach at low tide.
Even here, we're on a beach in Seattle, we only have to go down about 2 inches to see sort of the next step in what we think is this extinction mechanism. There, smell that.
Oh, yeah, it smells like rotten eggs.
Rotten eggs.
Yeah,
This is hydrogen sulfide from bacteria in the sediment. So let's just take those bacteria, put them in the ocean, and have untold tons of them.
Have it run amok.
Everywhere. The oceans are bacterial filled, and they're producing that same nasty rotten egg smell, but in sufficient quantity, not just to kill stuff in the water, but enough goes in the atmosphere to kill land life.
So it burps up this noxious gas.
Big bubbles come out of the oceans, and it will kill off animals and plants.
And so an extinction that began in the ocean works its way to the land.
Exactly. It's horrible.
So it starts with volcanoes spewing carbon dioxide. Next step, global warming. The oceans heat up and lose their oxygen. Nasty bacteria take over, burping out lots of poisonous gas. End result, mass extinction. Peter Ward is convinced this was the scenario, not just for the Permian, but for most of the other big extinction events too.
What really looks like a universal way that this has happened is this global warming leading to this terrible gas chamber atmosphere, killing off life in the ocean and land. It's not so much stuff from space that gets you, it's your own planet.
The Nevada rocks offer some support for the idea, at least for the Permian. This whole area was once at the bottom of an ocean, and tests on the rocks have revealed that in the years leading up to the extinction, the deep ocean water here had lost its oxygen. The next step will be to probe these rocks for telltale signs of that nasty bacteria and hydrogen sulfide. Until there's more evidence, the detectives won't all agree that the case is closed. But these experts are convinced that Earth's own environment could be the perpetrator of a mass extinction, whether it's 250 million years ago or right now.
We know for a fact that there have been huge changes in the environment and climate change. That could happen again today. No asteroids required. The Earth is an incredibly dynamic place. Lots happening. We have to understand those changes if we want to survive.
Aloha means hello. Aloha means goodbye. I came to say hello, but it's time to say goodbye. So if I'm ever back again, don't waste the time we have. Just say aloha, aloha, aloha.
With winter comes fears of the flu. And sometimes the flu can be deadly, especially the bird flu. You've all heard of it. It's a virus that people catch from birds, like chickens. It's already killed hundreds of people. Fortunately, this bird flu does not spread easily from person to person. But if it evolves a way to do that, we could be in big trouble. Correspondent Chad Cohen met up with folks who would try to stop that from happening by taking a closer look into our past at the most deadly viral outbreak ever.
Whatever scary things are lurking in the back of your freezer, I'll venture a guess. You've got nothing on Terrence Tumpy. Getting into his deep freeze at the CDC in Atlanta is like prepping for a spacewalk. Frozen inside sits a tiny vial of what might be the deadliest pathogen in history. A virus that hadn't been seen in almost 90 years, the 1918 flu, until Tumpy brought it back from the dead.
1918 was the worst pandemic we've seen for any virus, and this killed probably at least 50 million people worldwide.
In 1918, flu took 3 times as many lives as all of World War I.
So the question is, why was it 1918 so different? Why did it cause so many excess deaths compared to other pandemics?
And could a flu that deadly strike again? We do know where all flu viruses get their start, in the digestive tracts of birds.
They just happily coexist there, not causing disease for the most part in wild birds.
But every once in a while, an ordinary bird flu changes.
It's a mistake in nature. These viruses actually get out and infect other hosts.
Hosts like people. That's what scientists think may have happened in 1918.
The thought was that in 1918, the virus did cross the species barrier and directly infect humans.
That's one theory, at least. And when a virus that begins in birds gains the ability to pass from human to human, infecting our lungs, spreading through coughs and sneezes, no one's immune because it's never been around before. And that's when a pandemic occurs. We're hearing a lot recently about the threat of a new pandemic, the avian flu. It's quite lethal, transmitted through close contact with birds to people who work and live near birds.
Fortunately, this virus has not figured out how to efficiently transmit itself from human to human.
Infected people, in other words, cannot infect other people. The question is, will they ever be able to? And if so, how? And when this virus does strike, why does it kill? Terrence Tumpy believes he can find the answers by experimenting with a flu that transmitted and killed very well, the 1918 virus.
By having this in hand, we can actually try to understand better how these pandemic flu viruses work.
There was just one small problem. The 1918 virus hadn't been around for 9 decades.
No one had ever been able to study the 1918 virus, this horrible killer virus, because there were no isolates.
No living samples. But biologist Jeffrey Taubenberger, searching through preserved tissue samples of World War I soldiers, was able to recover the 1918 flu's genetic code. Somewhere buried within are instructions that give it the ability to kill. But where?
Unfortunately, when you look at the genetic sequence, the blueprint of this virus, there's no smoking gun that tells us that this particular virus is lethal.
Tumpy couldn't find an answer by simply reading a recipe for the 1918 flu virus. He needed to experiment with the real thing.
We felt like it was important to actually reconstruct this virus.
That's right, he said reconstruct. Rebuild the 1918 flu from scratch, one of the most lethal viruses we've ever known. Using Taubenberger's recipe and a technique called reverse genetics, scientists at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine added all the chemical building blocks in the right order and the right amounts. And it worked. They created a living 1918 virus so nasty that when Tumpy exposed lab mice to it, they were all dead in just 3 days.
I was quite surprised. I didn't anticipate that they would die that quickly. That was very quick.
And that was just what happened to humans in 1918. Unlike normal flu strains, which can only infect high in the respiratory tract, the 1918 virus attacked tissue deep in the lungs as well, and that's a vulnerable spot.
The delicate areas of our lung tissues causing this extreme inflammation, resulting in death.
The 1918 flu so badly inflamed those areas of its victims' lungs that many died through suffocation. And as it happens, that's just how the avian flu kills too.
Those are important characteristics and similarities among the 1918 virus as well as the avian virus.
So these two deadly viruses attack similar parts of the lungs, but that still doesn't answer the biggest question. Will the avian flu ever transmit from people to people like the 1918 virus did? Well, first let's back up a little bit. How does flu infect us in the first place? So this is what flu looks like under a microscope.
Electron microscope, yeah.
An actual flu virus. But for our purposes, let's represent a virus by this unpleasant fellow. For all his nastiness, he isn't all that complex. In fact, he only has 8 genes. We, by comparison, have more than 20,000. We're going to look at 2 of these 8 flu genes, one because it's responsible for getting the virus into a cell, and the other for getting it out again. Flu gets into cells with the hemagglutinin gene.
So in order to penetrate cells, you could imagine that the hemagglutinin was sort of like a key.
A key which we'll refer to simply as H. And that key unlocks the cell so that the virus can get inside.
If it gets into your cell, it'll take over the machinery of the cell and start making more copies of itself.
But now the virus has a problem. These copies are stuck to that cell. That's where the other gene comes in. It's called neuraminidase, or N for short.
Neuraminidase is critical for release. Getting back out.
The virus copies use N to cut themselves free. And now each of them, armed with their own H's and N's, are off to infect more cells. In birds, there are 16 different kinds of H genes and 9 N genes. Every flu is some combination of these. Humans have only caught a few. The Hong Kong flu, which killed nearly 1 million people when it broke out in 1968, gets in with H3 and out with N2, so it's called H3N2. In 1918, the virus which killed 50 million people was H1N1. Now there's the avian flu that's got everyone so worried. And it has a new combination of H's and N's, H5N1. The avian flu's H key, or hemagglutinin gene, can open the lock between birds and people. That is, transmit from birds to humans. But it still cannot open the lock between people, spread from one person to another, yet. But here's the problem. Once it's in our bodies, the hemagglutinin gene can change. It's as if it can fit the lock, but it can't turn it, which would be great if it stayed that way. But a virus's genetic recipe constantly changes, or mutates, as scientists like to say. And if just the right changes take place in the hemagglutinin gene, those changes could open the lock. Allowing it to spread between people. But exactly what are those changes?
Right, so here we can see it again.
Going back to Taubenberger's recipe for the 1918 virus, Ian Wilson and his colleagues at the Scripps Research Institute found the answer to what the 1918 virus may have needed to spread between humans. They pinpointed 2 changes, or mutations.
Only 2 mutations were sufficient to change the virus hemagglutinin to adapt to human receptors.
So, could those same 2 mutations in the avian flu's hemagglutinin gene allow it to spread between humans also? To find out, they tried those same 2 mutations.
To our surprise, We found that, in fact, we couldn't very easily change it with the mutations that occurred in 1918. So that suggests that it might actually be a little bit more difficult, and it might take a little more time for an H5N1 virus to be able to adapt to human lung cells.
And that's good news. The Scripps team believes the H5N1, or avian flu, doesn't seem to adapt easily so that people can infect other people. Back at the CDC, Tumpy is taking a different approach to find out why these viruses are so deadly. Instead of experimenting with tiny variations in a flu gene, Tumpy is testing entire genes. He's looking at each of the 1918 virus's 8 genes one by one to see which ones caused it to be so lethal and which ones should be the target of new antiviral drugs. He started with that H-key gene. He took one from his 1918 virus and put it in an ordinary seasonal flu.
A contemporary influenza strain that doesn't kill, and all of a sudden it was lethal.
And when he did the reverse, took the H-key from an ordinary flu and put it on a 1918 virus?
The virus was no longer lethal, didn't cause disease.
So all signs seem to point to the H-key, or HA as scientists call it, as being at least partly responsible for lethality.
Well, there's something very intriguing about the HA.
So intriguing that now Tumpy is planning to do something pretty radical. Put the hemagglutinin gene from the 1918 flu virus into the avian flu virus to see if he can create an avian flu virus that can spread from person to person.
You want to combine H1 1918 with H5. What's going on there?
I think it'll be important as a set of experiments to understand how H5N1 works. And by mix and matching it with genes from a virus that actually did that quite well, the 1918 virus, we were hopeful that we can figure that out. Well, I think from a scientific point of view, this is the only way to understand how these pandemic viruses work.
Tumpy is one of the few people in the world who has the clearance to work with a live 1918 flu virus.
So if we can figure out how to slow it down studying this virus as a model virus, then perhaps we'll advance our knowledge on the avian H5N1 virus as well. Maybe we can figure out how to stop it.
If Terence Tumpy has his way, the virus that took so many lives in the past may help prevent another from taking more lives in the future.
Life today revolves around technology. And when something goes wrong, it can be so frustrating. Sometimes you just wish machines could be a bit more helpful. Nicer.
Neil, this one's stuck.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, here's a scientist who wants to change things. She's working hard to design machines that are so much like us. We might even consider them our friends.
Friends.
That sounds familiar.
This is Leonardo. And today is his annual checkup. Or maybe I should say tune-up.
A little of both.
It's kind of both. It's a checkup and a tune-up, yeah.
You see, Leonardo is a robot.
So,
But the engineer who designed him thinks of him as much more than a machine.
do we have the tongue again? Where's Jesse? Jesse?
Cynthia Brazil
Oh, it is. Okay.
thinks of him as a creature.
And is the nose wrinkle? It's ready to go. Okay, cool.
That's because when Leonardo's been put back together and has his fur coat on, he's what you call a sociable robot.
Hello, Leo. Can you hear me?
A new breed of robot that Cynthia and her students are designing in the Robotic Life Lab at MIT.
This is the most amazing place you could imagine.
It's like working in Santa's workshop. Leo, this is Elmo. Can you find Elmo?
Cynthia's goal is to make robots that aren't just smart, but that can learn the way people do.
Good, Leo.
Communicate the way people do. Even become our friends.
What does it really mean to design a robot that understands and interacts and treats people as people?
If anyone can answer this question, it'll be Cynthia Brazil.
She's fearless, so she tries anything, and she just seems to have no concern whatsoever that it might fail. She just does it, and can't think of any cases where it actually has failed.
If you look at the field of robotics today, you can say robots have been in the deepest oceans, they've been to Mars, you know, they've been all these places, but they're just now starting to come into your living room. Your living room is the final frontier for robots.
That's because the living room is not an easy place for a robot to exist. After all, robotic vacuums like this one that are supposed to clean your house by themselves can't tell the difference between a chair leg and a human leg.
Oh, is it gonna go under the chair?
They're just things to avoid, or in this case, escape from. But for robots to become more than just tools, for them to become our partners, as Cynthia hopes, they need the same social skills as people, including emotion.
Yeah. Through our evolution, we're so specialized for social interaction. So if you can really design robots that can interact with people in this very natural interpersonal way, I think that would be great. You wouldn't have to have people read manuals in order to operate them. They'll be able to just interact with the robot the way that they would want to, which we think will be as people interact with other living things.
But wait a minute.
I've just about had enough of you.
Robots with emotion? Isn't that just something from the movies?
Scrap pile.
In Cynthia's case, that's exactly where it started.
I was about 10 years old and I saw the first Star Wars movie.
Excuse me, sir, but that R2 unit is in prime condition. A real bargain.
You saw R2-D2 and C-3PO and it's like, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen.
Now, don't you forget this.
R2-D2 and C-3PO were really kind of your sidekicks. They were really kind of your friends.
That was really sort of the beginning of her inspiration to do what she does now.
The daughter of two scientists, Cynthia had robots on the brain. And in 3rd grade in Livermore, California, she wrote a story that was strangely prophetic.
I talked about this robot that stole Huckleberry Pies. That apparently was a robot that was created by the Klingon Empire. The last sentence, I think, was perhaps the most salient, which is, and its feelings run on a computer. So, I mean, even then, it was just kind of a given for me that robots would have emotions and feelings.
Her teacher's only comment, proofread next time. Cynthia's passion for robots soon switched to sports.
She was actually a fairly accomplished tennis player, soccer and all these things growing up. That took me by surprise. I hadn't really expected that she was such a jock. I would have expected maybe more of an egghead.
Well, she did wind up at MIT, where she studied electrical engineering and computer science with Rodney Brooks, who was designing robots inspired by living, breathing creatures.
Cynthia came to my lab just a little while after we'd started building robots based on insects.
And I thought, you know, if we are ever going to see those robots that we saw in Star Wars in the real world, it's going to start in a place like this.
With Brooks, she built a robotic bug named Attila, and then moved up the food chain to working on a humanoid robot called Cog, who was strangely adept at playing with slinkies.
When we first thought about Cog, we thought about the all-intelligent robot that was going to be able to manipulate the world and do things. We weren't thinking about how it was really going to interact with people.
But Cynthia wanted to make a robot you can relate to, a robot that would learn because people would want to teach it.
She has this vision of robots. You build them starting with the social interaction, and you build the intelligence out from that.
Cynthia came up with the phrase, appliance or friend.
Wow.
But how do you make a robot that's more friend than appliance? Long before Cynthia had her own kids, Ryan and Nathan, she hit on an idea.
Sweetie.
What if you could get people to relate to a robot in the same way a parent relates to a child?
If you look at the way an adult interacts with an infant or very young child, you fundamentally have this highly sophisticated being interacting with an immature version of it. But yet you can still have a very genuine interaction. So we leverage that in building these robots that are also very youthful in their nature. It's a little trickier with the robots because the robots, of course, don't have these wonderful little brains and bodies that infants have. You know, it's a sort of very low-pass kind of crude approximation of that.
Beginning in the late 1990s, Cynthia rolled up her sleeves and got out the toolkit to build a new kind of robot based on theories of child development.
She's willing to have way out ideas and pursue them. At the same time, she will delve into any technology to put all the pieces together to make it happen.
What she came up with was a robotic head named Kismet, with baby-like features such as prominent eyes to draw people into a social relationship.
You're such a cute little robot. No.
She programmed Kismet to analyze the emotional intent of the person speaking to it, based on the pitch and intensity of their voice.
No.
Then, all on its own, Kismet computed the right emotional response, which it expressed in its face, posture, and voice.
People very quickly would become enamored and attached to the robot, but you almost can't help it because it was really adorable.
Kismet, I think we got something going on here. You and me.
Cynthia managed to get this being with a presence. Before Cynthia's work with Kismet, the question was, how does the robot react to the world? What Cynthia brought was, how do people react to the robot?
Overnight, Kismet and Cynthia were superstars. The name Kismet means fate in Turkish. And around this time, Cynthia sent a fateful email to someone she had met a few years before.
And the email is basically, you know, hi, it's Cynthia, do you remember me? Which I thought was kind of a funny thing, so of course I remembered her.
Cynthia and Bobby were eventually married, but not before Hollywood called. Steven Spielberg was just finishing the movie AI, a futuristic tale about the day scientists would program robots with the ultimate human emotion.
Tell me, what is love?
I met Steven Spielberg and gave him a little primer on AI and met Stan.
Stan was Stan Winston, legendary creator of movie creatures like the robots in Terminator. He had made all the robots for AI, including a bear that befriends humans and has emotions.
His name is Teddy.
I told Stan that we should build Teddy, but we should really build Teddy.
I am not a toy.
The result of their collaboration was the robot called Leonardo.
Of course, it's after Leonardo da Vinci, not Leonardo DiCaprio, which some people ask me.
It's a $1 million creature with a body by Stan and brains by Cynthia. Stan Winston hopes to use sociable robots in movies someday. But for now, Cynthia and her students are using Leonardo to explore how robots can learn and communicate with people in everyday situations.
Leo, this is Cookie Monster. Leo, can you find Cookie Monster?
To create a lifelike face-to-face interaction with people, software allows Leo to track the head of the person speaking to him. Then he stores the name and color and shape of the object in his memory.
Very good, Leo. Leo, this is Elmo. Can you find Elmo?
Leo can also use what he learns to think for himself. When Matt tries to trick him,
can you find Elmo?
Leo catches on quickly, responding with a shrug and even a puzzled look. Cynthia believes this kind of natural communication between people and machines is essential for robots to become part of our daily lives.
Cynthia is one of the best people in the world in terms of human-robot interaction and really understanding that it's much more than just a person pressing buttons on a machine, but really having the machine be engaging and improving that overall interaction.
The team's latest robot is a teddy bear called the Huggable. Inspired by pet therapy, it may one day act as a companion for kids in the hospital, as well as assist their caregivers.
Nice and silky smooth.
With skin that's sensitive to touch and temperature, it's designed for physical, full-body interaction with humans.
This guy has a motion classifier in him, which means he knows how he's being moved. So I can do some stuff like bouncing him, and you can see on the screen how he's responding. Pretty psyched about that. He can also respond to, if I want to be kind of evil, maybe some shaking. And I made him sad. That was mean. When he's used in hospitals, if a kid were to shake him like I just did, the nurses station could get a little message saying, you may want to check in on room 44. And then the last thing this guy will do is if I put him down, he knows he's not moving anymore. And so he's going to respond by saying goodbye. Yep, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Ooh, you got some fancy moves there.
But will we ever have an interaction with a robot that's as genuine as this? And if so, would that be a good thing?
I really didn't believe that we would have better living with robots. That robots could really be a technology that enhanced and complemented our lives. The way that, same reason we create any other technology. I certainly wouldn't be doing it.
Maybe Nathan and Ryan could be among the first kids to grow up with robots that go beyond just the notion of a vacuum cleaner, but actually socially and emotionally engaging and interactive robots would be pretty cool.
I do think in time, people will have sort of relationships with certain kinds of robots, not every robot, but certain kinds of robots, where they might feel that it is a sort of friendship that is going to be of a robot humankind.
When I was a kid, I used to play this game, Password. And the secret password is always invisible, hidden, until you slid the paper into the sleeve. And then, the secret word is revealed. Well, what if the secret words aren't part of a kid's board game, but instead on a crumbling ancient manuscript? Correspondent Beth Nissen caught up with investigators who are uncovering secret messages that have stayed hidden for 2,000 years.
In these vaults, on these shelves, in these boxes at Oxford University, ancient clues, 2,000 years old, to a glorious human past. Wrapped in printed paper, fragments of ancient paper, pieces of the DNA of Western civilization.
Here's one that contains a large page of Homer's Odyssey, still with quite a bit of mud and sand clinging to it.
These are only a few of the faded fragments found buried near the outskirts of what was, at around the turn from BC into AD, a mid-sized capital city in Greek-ruled Egypt, the city of Oxyrhynchus, actually found buried in the Oxyrhynchus city dump in rubbish mounds.
There can be more Homer, new pieces of Sophocles, Euripides, other authors who were being read in antiquity. You never really know what's going to come out of the box.
Or whether what comes out of the box can be read.
Abrasion, dirt, clay, silt, an awful lot can go wrong when something is buried underground for 2,000 years.
Yet somehow, buried above the water tables and beneath the dry sands of Egypt for all those centuries, almost 500,000 of these papyri fragments survived, these pieces of ancient paper made from papyrus.
Papyrus is a plant. It is a reed that grows almost exclusively along the banks of the Nile. You shave that stalk into thin strips, lay them parallel to each other, lay strips running perpendicular to them. You pound it or press it such that the cell walls break down, cellulose seeps out, creating a kind of gooey natural glue that binds the strips together, which can then be pressed, polished, and written on. The stuff is really quite durable, in a way more durable than the paper you're used to taking notes on today.
The tons of this reedy paper found at Oxyrhynchus documented the daily life of an ancient city's markets and businesses and courts.
We have marriage contracts, divorce contracts, tax declarations, census registers, hate mail, dinner invitations. We have letters home to mom. You name it, we have it on papyrus.
Thousands more of the Oxyrhynchus fragments were unreadable, soiled, grimy.
Because this is a rubbish dump, things get charred if burning waste was put on top of them, or stained.
Or like this fragment, which looks at first like the work of, say, Jackson Pollock of Crete. The only readable word of Greek is just visible at the very bottom. You can read Christos.
There's Christos. Chi Rho Sigma with the bar above it, so that's the abbreviation for Christos. You know it's a Christian text. But much of it is totally illegible.
And papyrologists assume there are letters there. Papyrus was too expensive to throw away unused, and often had writing on both sides. But texts like this were a tantalizing, frustrating mystery.
Really, you're never going to be able to publish a text like this. You can look at that under the microscope as much as you like, but it's just a complete mess.
What papyrologists really needed was this, an equivalent to Superman's X-ray vision, a way to see through whatever was on the surface of papyri, ancient food stains, burn marks, mummy paint, see through to the writing underneath.
Losses due to abrasion,
As the ancient Greek scientist Archimedes is said to have said from his bath, Eureka.
that stain is showing up.
It's called multispectral imaging, a technology developed by NASA to see through clouds of gas in space.
It was a significant step forward when a scholar at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory decided to apply the technology to texts.
Ancient texts written on papyri. The project today, see if multispectral imaging can help scholars at the University of California at Berkeley read part of an account of the Trojan War by the poet Dictys of Crete, a part obscured by a large reddish stain.
Some people think it's a spill, a chemical spill perhaps, or a spot of wine that was dropped on it. Even the best papyrologists who've worked on this are usually not able to pick out any more than a few scattered letters in here, and even at that, they feel like they're guessing.
The fragile fragment is put on a moving imaging bed under a scientific-grade digital camera, which captures high-definition images of the fragment through a succession of color filters, one filter at a time, a dozen different filters in all.
Each individual filter allows only a certain portion of the light spectrum through.
The light in the range of the spectrum visible to the naked eye reflects off whatever is on the surface of most of the papyri pieces, the stains, dirt, mummy paint, whatever. The camera can't see much more through these filters than the eye can, which isn't much.
Isn't this an area where they really have not been able to make any readings at all?
Exactly. I mean, if you look
But results tend to be better using the filters that let in the range of the light spectrum the human eye cannot see.
I've seen the best results in the infrared at 950 nanometers.
Light in the infrared part of the spectrum, invisible to the naked eye but not the camera, is more likely to pass through what's on the papyrus surface to the ink underneath. Surface stains and dirt fade away. The inked letters appear. Black magic.
Ink, which is pretty much pure carbon, it's made out of soot mixed with glue, will absorb all of the infrared, and so it'll come out black.
That's fantastic.
Great, it really looks as if there's no stain at all.
Every time they see this 21st century technology work on 1st or 2nd century fragments, papyrologists are thrilled, or as thrilled as papyrologists get.
None of us is really inclined to, give high fives and celebrate too much, but we were really pleased.
They've been pleased with multispectral imaging at Oxford, too, home of the world's largest collection of ancient papyri, all those fragments excavated from the Oxyrhynchus city dump. They have as many as 500,000 fragments, but only about 1% have been read and published by the few scholars working on them. Uncounted thousands are illegible, in shreds, soiled.
There are fragments there that we'd pretty much completely given up all hope of ever being able to read.
Like that Jackson Pollock-y fragment that had the word Christos on it.
We put it under the multispectral imaging camera, and all of a sudden the background completely drops out, and wherever there was ink, you can read the ink as clear as the day it was written.
And what was written? A passage from the New Testament, St. Paul's Epistle to the Romans, chapter 14, verses 7 to 9.
And then, es toutogar Christos epethenen, for this reason did Christ die, and it is now our earliest copy for these verses. We did have another 3rd century papyrus of the Epistle to the Romans, but it actually is very fragmentary. But now we've got the complete text of these verses in a late 2nd or early 3rd, perhaps, century copy.
I don't know how long we have until the things sitting in shoe boxes in this or that university turn to dust, but we've got to get rolling. There are a great many, many thousands of papyri that are sitting in boxes in dark hallways waiting to be read.
And now for some final thoughts on extinction. When you look up to the sky, you see the moon, sun, and stars not as they are, but as they once were. Traveling at more than 186,000 miles per second, their light simply takes time to reach us. From the moon, it takes between 1 and 2 seconds. From the sun, a little more than 8 minutes. From Alpha Centauri, the nearest star system to the sun, about 4 years. From the Andromeda Galaxy, a close neighbor to the Milky Way, light takes more than 2 million years to reach us. So the farther away an object is, the further back in time we see it. Keep this up, and eventually we bear witness to the birth of galaxies and the birth of the universe itself. Yes, we can look back into the past of distant places, but aliens within those distant places can look our way and bear witness to our distant past. For all we know, light from Earth's greatest extinction episodes is just now reaching alien telescopes, perhaps prompting them to wonder, has planet Earth reached a dead end? Does life there have any future at all? Today, with the highest rate of species going extinct since the demise of the dinosaurs, those same questions should perhaps occur to us too. And that is the cosmic perspective. And now we'd like to hear your perspective on this episode of Nova Science Now. Log on to our website and tell us what you think. You can watch any of these stories again, listen to podcasts, hear from experts, and much, much more. Find us at pbs.org. That's our show. We'll see you next time.
Educators and other educational institutions can order this or other NOVA programs for $19.95 plus shipping and handling. Call WGBH Boston Video at 1-800-255-942.
There. We look around, no flowers, no flowering plants. There's not even dinosaurs. This is before dinosaurs. There probably wasn't a single animal on the planet with fur.
True mammals hadn't evolved yet, but their ancestors were there. Animals like this Lemurisaurus.
This is a mammal-like reptile, probably small dog size. This animal is a carnivore. It really has a dog-like appearance. We can see this great big piercing tooth.
Clearly making him a predator.
Yeah, but this entire group dies out in the extinction itself.
There were creatures right out of a science fiction movie, like plant-eating lysosaurs, and ruining their dinner, monstrous gorgons. The extinction ravaged the oceans, once filled with exotic animals. But then, about 250 million years ago, almost everything on sea and land died. So, who's the culprit? What could kill off so much life? Could it be climate change? Global warming? In a remote Nevada desert, a team of investigators is trying to solve an old murder mystery.
So yeah, this looks good.
And I mean old. The victims were knocked off about 250 million years ago in an ancient mass extinction.
Based on the fossil record, this is probably the most profound extinction of animal life.
There's no other time in the last 600 million years that you wipe out 95% of all the species in the ocean.
Geologist Sam Bowering and paleontologist Doug Irwin think this hillside might be a scene of the crime. They're looking for clues to find out what caused the mysterious end of the geologic period, known as the Permian.
The Permian world and the extinction that ended the Permian world really reset the nature of life on this planet. This is a straight nautiloid.
Paleontologist Peter Ward has spent years collecting fossils from the strange time of the Permian.
Permian would have looked very different to us. Let's say we go back.
Wait a minute, an emotional robot?
I do think in time, people will have sort of relationships where they might feel that it is a friendship, that it's going to be of a robot humankind.
Can you find Elmo?
All that and more on this episode of Nova Science Now. Hello, I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, your host for Nova Science Now. We all know that Earth is brimming with life. All kinds of life, as it has been for most of the past 600 million years. But every now and then, something happens. Earth becomes a very unfriendly place, and most life can't survive. It's called mass extinction. We know it's happened over and over again in the deep past, but we don't always know why.
Extinction of animal life.
For years, the killer was a mystery, but now researchers think it could be something we're all familiar with today.
Smell that.
Oh, yeah, it smells like rotten eggs.
Rotten eggs.
Yeah. And the trigger could be all around us.
This terrible gas chamber atmosphere. It's not so much stuff from space that gets you, it's your own planet.
Talk about extinction. This scientist has brought back to life one of the most lethal viruses in history, the 1918 flu.
This killed probably at least 50 million people worldwide.
What was he thinking?
We felt like it was important to actually reconstruct this virus.
What he's learned might unlock the secrets of how the avian flu, the one we're worried about now, could spread, infect, and possibly kill millions.
Maybe we can figure out how to stop it.
And you'll meet this guy.
Hello, Leo. Can you hear me?
He was designed by an engineer who's building sociable robots.
You're such a cute little robot.
Robots that one day may even become our friends, with feelings and emotions.
Ooh.
Or would you need something from out of this world? There have been at least 5 major extinctions in the past 600 million years. Most of us have heard of one at the close of the Cretaceous, ending the reign of the dinosaurs. But that happened about 65 million years ago, when an asteroid the size of Mount Everest slammed into our planet, leaving a giant crater near what is now Mexico. So we know the dinosaurs were knocked off by a giant rock that fell from the sky. And we also know that these rocks hit Earth from time to time. So when we try to figure out what caused all the mass extinctions of the past, shouldn't it just make sense that they'd also be caused by comets and asteroids?
I went into this controversy fully expecting to find all the evidence for impact, and at the end of the Cretaceous, we see this. We see lots of comet material or asteroid material.
Not to mention the crater, of course.
Not to mention the crater, and least of all the crater.
So you've got the smoking gun, and the bullets, and of course the dead bodies, I guess.
Well, the only thing we have at the end of the Permian are the dead bodies.
So if asteroids and extinction don't necessarily go hand in hand,